Let's take a breath. We're continuing to move through this month with rekindling the flame. Rekindling the flame and knowing that the flame is the life force. The flame is that God presence within each of us, that God presence that is everywhere present. The flame is that divine fire to which we return once we have separated ourselves from it. Ernest Holmes says, when man separates himself from the divine fire, he becomes an isolated spark. And so every time we return to the divine fire, we're rekindling that flame. And so that's what we're talking about this month, rekindling the flame. Let's take a breath, because we know that life is worth living. Life is for living. Life is worth living. And that's what we're doing. We're saying yes. And every time we say yes, we're rekindling the flame. Every time we say yes, we are moving into that presence, moving into that power, moving into that place of oneness. We are rekindling the flame so that we are ablaze, with the presence of God. And that's what we want to be all the time, ablaze with the presence of God. And so today I'm talking about never say never. Thank you. Thank you very much. Never say never. And that comes up when we sometimes are looking at what other people are doing and how they're living their lives and how they're walking this walk through this thing we call life. And we'll say to ourselves, I would never do that. Or I'll never do anything like that. Right? And the other way we use that term never in our daily living is when we have done something that we're not real happy about. We'll say, I'll never do that again. I'll never do that again. So it always comes up around either judgment of other people, I'd never do that, or it comes up with regret in our own lives. I'll never do that again. My mother used to say my mother talked a lot, even though she was a very quiet person. She always had certain things that she said over and over. And one of them she would say was that the only reason you don't do most of the things that you say you would never do is because you don't live long enough. She said, because as we go through our lives and we say, I'd never do this, or I will never do that again, if you live long enough, you find that unless you change something, or unless something, she didn't use the word consciousness, but that's exactly what she meant. Unless your consciousness shifts, unless something shifts, then you will find yourself doing that if you live long enough. And so I sometimes that comes to mind, that the only reason we don't do some of the things we say we'll never do is because we aren't here long enough to do them. But you know what? We can change that. We can change that by being consciously aware of the things of how we want our lives to be, by being consciously aware of the things that we want to experience in our lives, by being consciously aware of how we are moving through this world, by being consciously aware of when we are judging or comparing other people's walk to our walk, how other people live their lives to the way we live our lives, and of course the way we do it is a little bit more superior than the way they do it. So that's why I never do that, because that's what she does, or that's what he does, or that's the way they do it. All that separation kind of language, all that separation kind of thinking. And we all do it. We all do it. We all look at other people and say, I would never do that. I would never let my children do that. I would never let my spouse do this. I would never, right? We get caught up in that never, never, never. And you look up one day and your kids are doing exactly what you said that you would never let them do. And they're doing it anyway. Or the things that we say, I will never do that again. And then you look at, as I was saying last week, how did I get back here? How did I get back here? How did I get back here? And it takes us back to that to the basic teaching of science of mind: change your thinking, change your life. Change your thinking, change your life. Either way, for the positive or for the negative, which means that we have to constantly be aware of what our thinking is. We have to be constantly be aware of the tenor of our thinking. We have to be constantly and consciously aware of of the processes that we allow ourselves to go through, the things that we allow ourselves to get caught up in. Change your thinking, change your life. Yes, we know that means for the better. And I'm saying to you, change your thinking, change your life can be in the opposite direction also. So we have to always be mindful. We have to always be aware. We have to always be intentional in the way we live our lives, intentional in the way we walk through our lives, intentional in the way that we interact with each other. It is necessary for us to always be, and in order to be intentional, we have to be present. In order to be present, we have to be mindful. In order to be mindful, we have to be fully focused, fully anchored in what we want, fully anchored in the power and the presence, fully anchored in oneness with the all that is. That's where we have to be, and that's the way we really want to live our lives. Let's take a breath. People are looking at me and not breathing. Let's take a breath, yeah. You know, when we get into this whole thing about never and saying never, I'll never do this, or I'll never live my life that way, or I'll never do this again, that comes from a place of fear usually, because never closes us off. Never closes us off. And when I'm going to be looking at the two emotions today, if you will, fear and love. So when we're in that place of fear-induced living, when we're in that place of fear-induced thinking, then we get into the nevers. And we get in, and fear separates us. Someone said that the biggest crisis we face is fear, because when we're in fear, we believe in the reality of the crisis. But when we are in faith, when we are in love, we believe in the only thing that's real. When we are in fear, we believe in the reality of the crisis. So fear is our biggest crisis. And when we are in that, just looking around us today, in the way the world, the things are moving about in the world, the way things are changing in the world, the way that people are changing, the way that there seems to be so much separation, that's fear-based thinking. That's fear-induced thinking. And so we think we have a crisis. We have a crisis, and the crisis is the fear itself, because we start to believe in the reality of that crisis. We start to believe in the reality of that fear, whatever it is we're fearing. And that's what we begin to live out, those things. When we change our thinking, we change our lives. Changing our thinking can help us to evolve, and changing our thinking can help us to devolve. It can help us to devolve also. So it's really important for us to know, and as I said, to be intentional about what we are thinking, what we are processing, what we are saying, how we are living, what we are believing. It's important for us to be fully present and to be mindful. Each and every moment of each and every day, it is so important at this time in our lives, because there appears to be so much separation around us, so much of them and us around us. And as we move closer and closer to the election coming up, as we move closer and closer and deal more and more and hear more and more about politics, even if you're not into that, there's that whole race-conscious thing that happens, that we get caught up in. We get caught up in that race-conscious belief. We get caught up in that race-conscious energy. We get caught up in all that's being spewed out. And it's up to us to remain anchored, to remain focused, to remain, the word's not coming, to remain anchored in the truth, to remain anchored in what we know, to remain anchored in our awareness of the oneness of life, to remain anchored in our knowledge and awareness that there's only one life, there's only one power, there's only one presence, there's only one of us here. There's only one of us here. There's only one of us here, and that one is expressing as each and every one of us right here and right now. And it's important for us to keep that in mind so that we don't get caught up in this fear-induced thinking and judging and separation. When we get into I will never do that again, we're separating from ourselves, because we're moving into a place of regret. We're moving into a place of judgment about ourselves. So it's so important as we it's so important as we continue our journey in oneness, our journey of oneness, to make sure that we are including consciously ourselves in that also, so that we are not separating from ourselves, so that we are not separating from who we are, so that we are not separating and putting our focus outward, if we're always turning our focus within, always turning our focus within, always turning our focus within. That's where it always has to be. Everything begins within. Everything begins within. So it doesn't matter what we're learning out there, what we're seeing out there, what we're thinking about out there. Everything starts with what we're saying and feeling and experiencing within. Our yes can be ever so strong. You can yell out yes all you want, but yes begins within. So if you're yelling out yes and yes and yes, and you're not saying it inside, there's no inner yes, it doesn't work. Because as within, so without. Our hearts know the yes. Our hearts know the place of oneness. Our hearts know what alignment looks like. Our hearts know all of this. That's where we run, in the direction of our hearts. And this is what love-inspired living is all about. Love-inspired living. We want to release and let go of the fear-induced living. And we want to move into a place of love-inspired living. Love-inspired by rekindling the flame of love. Rekindling the flame of love. Love is all there is. Love is all there is. Love is eternal. Love is eternal. It is. It is. The light of love never goes out. So with the flame of love never goes out. It's always aglow. It's always ablaze. Because love is God itself. God is love itself. There's no difference. There's no separation. And so we want to move into that place of how we live our lives. Place, and when we move into that place, then never doesn't come up. When it does come up, it's coming up from a love-inspired place, like love never fails. The universe never plays favorites. God never fails. I remember one of the first books I read when I discovered Science of Mind 100 years ago was God Never Fails by Mary Kupferl. I'll never forget that book. That and Life is for Living were the first. Life is for Living and that book were the first two books that I read. And I just loved that book, God Never Fails. It was such a simple book, yet there's so much truth. I mean, it's just all truth about it. Just the statement itself, God never fails. And that's how we live our lives, when we recognize that we are always one with that presence that never fails. We're always one with that presence that always is. We're always one with that love that always was, always is, always will be. And so when we live our lives from that place, then when there's so many possibilities for us when we're living from that place. When we live our lives from that place of love, then other people seeing us can say, oh, that's possible. Oh, now I see what's possible. That's the way we want to live our lives, so that people can look at us and see what's possible. That's the way we want to be as a community, so that people can look at this Creative Living Fellowship community and say, oh, that's possible for a community. Oh, this is what's possible. There's so much change that's going on, not only in the world, but in our world right here. We are still in the throes of change. The winds of change are always blowing. If they were not, we would be stagnant and dying out. We are not. Change is always happening. Change is always happening. New people are coming in. Some people are leaving. Some people are returning. All kinds of things are going on. Growth, expansion, all of that's all happening, and that's called change. And when that happens, then there's some discomfort that comes, but there's so many possibilities. There's so many possibilities. So what we're doing now, by releasing and letting go of fear-induced living, then we are planting the seeds. We're planting the seeds for growth, for expansion, for love, for possibilities. We're planting the seed for infinitude, to express itself right here and right now. Because possibilities are infinite, because we are of the infinite. And because we are of the infinite, then our lives are filled with possibilities. And so we have to start now planting those seeds. And I was reading something this week that said, pick what you plant. Pick what you plant. That's the same as reap what you sow. We pick what we plant. So we want to make sure that we're planting the seeds of what we want so that when the picking time comes, and those of you from the South or from farmlands know what I mean, when picking time comes, then we're picking what we want because we've planted what we want. We planted the seeds for what we want. This is what love-inspired living is all about. This is what rekindling the flame of love is all about. When we can interact with each other with love, accepting each other as we are, accepting another person as they are and where they are on their journey. They may not be in the same place you are, but you're not in the same place they are either. And wherever they are, however they are, is their walk. Wherever we are, that's our walk. And no, they're not going to be the same because we're not supposed to be. Because God expresses through each and every one of us according to our own uniqueness, according to our own individuality. And so we have to honor and respect the individuality of each of us. Our own individuality and somebody else's individuality. We have to be in that place of respect, that place of honoring, that place of loving, that place of compassion, that place of forgiveness. That place of forgiving somebody for being the way they are. Forgiving somebody else for not being the way you want them to be. How dare they? How dare they do it their way? How dare they live their lives the way they want to, even though it's their life? I know better about how they're supposed to live it. Yeah. And other people will treat us the same way. How dare we live our lives the way we want? It's our life. We get to live it the way we want. What we want to do is to make sure that that song, Holy, Holy Way. How many of you have noticed that there are not two holies, H-O-L-Y? There's a holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y. Holy mean entirely. Holy meaning completely. Holy meaning the whole thing. I want to live my life in a holy, entirely holy, sacred way. Let me live in a holy, holy way. Let me love in a holy, holy way. Let me sing in a holy, holy way. Let me interact with everyone with whom I come in contact in a holy, holy way. That's really powerful. I invite you to, as we sing these songs week after week, don't take them for granted. Don't sing them as a matter of rote. Really, really, really move into the meaning, move into the words of it. I want to live in a holy, holy way. I want to live in a holy, holy way. I want to live in an entirely sacred way. That's what we're singing on Sunday morning. I want to live in an entirely sacred way, a way that is of God. I want to sing in a holy and entirely sacred way. I want to sing God's song, holy, entirely. That's what we're saying. I want to love in a holy and entirely, a completely sacred way. And when we're singing that week after week and hugging each other and saying how great it is to see each other, what happens when we leave? What happens to the W-H-O-L-L-Y when we leave here? What happens to the H-O-L-Y when we get in our cars and drive off? When we get home and get aggravated with whoever happens to be there. Or whoever happens to come on the TV. How do we do? What happens to holy, holy? What happens to holy, holy? That holy, holy. And so I'm inviting you to make the commitment to live your life in a holy, holy way, in an entirely sacred way, in everything you do, everywhere you go, with every person you meet. This is what love-inspired living is all about. This is how we rekindle the flame of love. This is how we live our lives in a way that shows that we are ablaze with the presence of God. Ablaze with the presence of God. You know that word excites me, so I have to say it all. Some words just really do that for me. And ablaze is one of them. So we live our lives in a way that shows that we are ablaze with the presence of God. And we do that when we greet each other from a place of genuineness, when we greet each other from that sacred place, from that holy place, from that holy, holy place. When we sing from a holy, holy place, when we allow our songs to be sung through us. When we live our lives, when we love from that holy, holy place. And that holy, holy place is that place of oneness, that place of God presence, that place where we are reconnecting, reuniting with that divine fire so that we are not those isolated sparks, so that we are ablaze with that presence of God, because we are once again united with that presence, which is the source of our being. And so I invite you this week to rekindle the flame of love. Rekindle the flame of love. Allow it to be rekindled within you as you make your commitment to live in a completely sacred way, an entirely sacred way. As we walk through this life without judgment, without fear, without regret, without anxiety, without all that stuff that we get caught up in. And we take a breath and open our hearts and make ourselves available to all the possibilities, recognizing that there is a power for good, as Ernest Holmes says, in the universe that we can use. But you know what? We have to choose it too. Yes, we can use that power for good in the universe, but we have to choose it. We have to choose it. It's here, always right where we are, awaiting our recognition of it. In the scripture, it says, I stand at the door and knock. But we have to open the door. And so when we are in that place of living our lives, of walking this journey, walking through this thing called life, let's do that in a way that we are choosing that powerful good in the universe that is just awaiting our recognition of it so that we can use it. And the more we move into a place where we can use it, we allow it to use us. We allow it to use us. And oh boy, fasten your seatbelts. Fasten your seatbelts. Fasten your seatbelts. That's what yes does. Fasten your seatbelts. So I invite you to go through your life in a love-inspired way. Let that be your commitment to live a holy, holy life. Let's turn within. And so just taking a breath in this moment, just recognizing that this is the only breath. There's only one breath. That breath breathes each and every one of us. That breath, the only breath, is also the only life. It is the only heartbeat. It is the only mind. It is the only presence, the only love, the only. The only is my very life. The only is the life of each of us here this day. The only is what I choose to call God. The source of my being, the source of our being, the source of all. And so it is from this place of awareness that I speak this word for each of us this day. Just speaking a word of openness, speaking a word of love, a word of love that just washes over us, that washes in and through us, that it's all about us. We are one with it, this love that heals everything. So I speak a word of healing for each of us as we release those things that don't serve, whatever they may be, whether they're physical, mental, emotional, financial, whatever they may be. We release those and let those go and breathe in that love presence that is always right where we are, right here and right now, and allow it to wash over us, healing us, growing us. I give great thanks for this awareness of this presence of God that is within each of us. And in this circle of prayer, I pause momentarily so that you may speak the names of anyone you'd like held in prayer. You may speak their names silently or loud, and you may speak them now. And so for all those whose names are spoken here this day, I know that God is right where each of them is, blessing and keeping them, and that healing is happening in each and every life. For all things are made new in the presence of God. This prayer goes out to anyone on this planet needing a prayer this day, knowing that God is in the midst of every situation, every circumstance, every event. Despite any appearances, God is. Thank you, Father, Mother God. Thank you, Infinite Presence. Thank you, Divine Mother. I know indeed that all is well, and I just allow it to be. And so it is.